We're back. Welcome to New Generation Media. EJ Stewart, Kendall Stewart. Yes, we're back on New Generation Media on our YouTube channel, bringing you NBA draft coverage. It's NBA draft season. It's been a long year for both Kendall and myself. A lot of stuff happening with our personal and professional lives, but we were not going to neglect NBA draft season. We thought this was the perfect time to make our return. So really happy to be back here on New Generation Media. Hope the people who've been missing us are ready to have us back into the fold. And Kendall, NBA draft lottery was just this past week, so now we know where the French phenom Victor Wembanyama will be going. He'll be going to San Antonio. So this video will be dedicated to just what we can expect from Wembanyama, not only in his first year in San Antonio, but in the subsequent years beyond that, and what we can expect as NBA observers now that we have Victor Wembanyama entering the NBA. So Kendall, first of all, good to have you back as always. Good to be back with you covering NBA draft stuff ahead of the draft next month. Let's talk about Wemby, man.
Yeah, I mean, there was no shot we were going to be missing out on the most anticipated, draft prospect that we've covered or that we've seen since we started covering the draft here on YouTube. There was no shot we were going to sit this one out. So obviously, you say great to be back. But you mentioned it, man. Victor Wembanyama is a guy that we haven't really talked about much on our YouTube channel. We talked about him a little bit on the podcast, New Generation Sports Talk, which you can check out on all your podcasting platforms. But no, Victor Wembanyama is a superstar freak, whatever you want to call him, generational type of talent. So obviously, it's a huge get for San Antonio winning that lottery, and assuming they go in that direction, that'll be it'll be a match made in heaven for I think a lot of different reasons. When you think about Wembanyama's status as a all-time great big man prospect, when you think about the international and history of the San Antonio Spurs and particularly with French players as well, with Tony Parker and Boris Diaw and Nando De Colo, and the list goes on and on of guys that they've had that Victor Wembanyama is obviously familiar with personally and just throughout his time. So and also just the timing of the Spurs being a team that's been in purgatory for the last pretty much since they got rid of Kawhi Leonard. For a lot of reasons, this is a great fit for the NBA. It's a great fit for all parties involved.
Yeah, so when we talk about the San Antonio Spurs, they are coming off one of their worst seasons in a long time. They, of course, were in the position to potentially get with Wembanyama because of the season that they had. There were questions about whether Greg Popovich will return after the season they had. He's been around there for a long time. Spurs kind of been their draft history recently has been a bit of a mixed bag. They haven't necessarily been able to get that game-changing player. Where do you see Victor Wembanyama in terms of how he could change life for the Spurs coming into next season?
For starters, Wembanyama is not he's not 6'5", so that'll already break a trend in terms of the San Antonio Spurs draft history.
Yeah,
not within the 6'4" to 6'7" range.
So you mean this is not Lonnie Walker, or this is not
Keldon Johnson?
Yeah, Keldon or Devin Vassell. Yeah, this is
So yeah, that'll make Brian Wright and R.C. Buford and Greg Popovich's jobs a lot easier when it comes to making this draft pick. But no, I think that obviously what's so unique about Victor and the Spurs roster is that it was a roster that before Victor was there was kind of a mess because they just had no direction, they had no alpha, they had no guy. I mean, Keldon Johnson did an excellent is probably a stretch, but he did an admirable job at averaging 22 points a game, playing in a role he's probably not supposed to be playing in, being that number one option guy. But what's great about it is that their roster is also constructed perfectly for a guy like Victor to come in and be the guy right away. There's nobody stepping on his toes, and he's got 3, 4, 5, or 6 really solid role player guys that can really help support him. Jeremy Sohan, who's an excellent long-term fit next to Victor Wembanyama. I mentioned Keldon Johnson, who's, got one of the better contracts in the NBA, going to be locked in for the next 4 years for San Antonio. You mentioned, Devin Vassell and Malachi Branham. I mean, these are all young wings that, fit that mold of guys that you want around Victor. I just think the one question for them long term is going to be the point guard position. I think that obviously is the most important position when you're talking about building a team around this guy. He's going to need high level point guard play, although he's shown his ability to create his own shot in France and playing in international competitions. When he gets to the NBA, it's going to be ideal for him to play with a guy that can get him the ball in the right spots. So that'll be, I think, the question for San Antonio, is finding a point guard that you can build with either in the short term or the long term to play with Victor as they go forward. And I like Trey Jones. He's going to be a restricted free agent, but I think you need a guy that has a little bit more seasoning under his belt for this team.
Yeah, this is very interesting because I think when we talked about the idea of Wembanyama as a player, because that's what he was for just a long time, an idea, because we didn't know where he's going to go. We didn't know what the fit was going to be. So it's interesting now that we know where it is, and he's going to the Spurs. And I think from an organizational standpoint, a head coaching standpoint, it's a perfect fit. I think from a team standpoint, the notion that maybe Victor could take a team year one and turn them into a winner immediately kind of disappeared when this was the team that drafted him, in my opinion. Now, we'll see. The Spurs could do a lot of things in this offseason, but I think you're right. I think one of the things that concerns me with the fit is the lack of point guard play, because that is one of the big things they are missing. I agree. Keldon Johnson has really shined since he got to San Antonio. He's been a really good player. He had a really good season last year. So you have, a number two kind of scorer. You have some guys around Victor that can shoot the ball a little bit. You got Branham, you got Vassell. So you got some shooters.
Doug McDermott
had a really good season, but where are you getting your easy baskets? Who's getting you your good shots in the offense from the point guard position? And that's the big question mark. Trey Jones was their starter last year. We know he's an excellent defensive player. Offensively, he leaves a little bit to be desired, to be quite honest. He's obviously not a really good three-point shooter. He's a fine kind of floor general guy, but in this NBA, you kind of need that lead guard to be able to just get whatever he wants and take over games and be able to be a threat to score the ball. And him not being that kind of guy, I think does limit the ceiling for what San Antonio could do in year one with Victor, even though I think Victor himself, will end up having monster numbers. What do you see Victor in terms of a number standpoint from year one? I'll put it on the line right now. I think Victor Wembanyama year one is an all-star. It's been a long time since we've had an NBA all-star rookie. I can't even remember the last guy who did it.
Yeah, LeBron.
LeBron was not. Yao was an all-star. It might have been Yao. I guess technically maybe Blake Griffin, though he was kind of a weird. Yeah. He wasn't. He was a rookie, but it was the second year in the NBA. So I guess Blake Griffin technically be the last guy, but I think Yao would be the last true rookie to be an all-star. I think that Victor Wembanyama, I think he puts up huge numbers year one. I mean, when it comes to his game, I am right there with those people who say he might be the best prospect we've seen in a generation. I mean, you're talking about a guy who's 7'5". He handles the ball like a guard. He shoots the ball like a guard. And then you talk about the defensive end. He's so long. He can interact and affect any shot around the basket. He changes the way you attack offensively. He's that much of an impact on his own that I think he will be an all-star year one. I just don't know if the Spurs as a team, I can see a lot of success in year one just because there's so many other pieces they're going to have to figure out beyond Wembanyama, particularly at that point guard spot. That's the main one that concerns me a little bit because I think Victor's going to get a lot of shots on his own. He's not going to have guys that are going to get him a lot of easy looks.
The guy I would target, before I answer your question on his it's year one outlook, is the guy I would look for. I don't know how you make this work, but is there a chance? I mean, his salary cap number is coming down. Is there a chance you make a run at Chris Paul? Does Chris Paul want to play there? I mean, I think that it's a more attractive spot now, obviously, with Victor there. I mean, is that a guy that, does the timeline fit for both parties? Probably not, but maybe that's what's ideal about it.
Yeah, I mean, well, Chris Paul, so he has a partially guaranteed contract coming into this next season. So if the Suns cut him, he'll be a free agent. There's the word early is that they're unlikely to do that, but it doesn't mean they won't necessarily trade him. Now the question becomes, are you making a trade for Chris Paul? Does that make sense given where the team is? I think for the Spurs, you'd have to take a hard look at exactly who are you looking to bring back and who are you looking to get rid of, because they have a lot of clutter when you look at their offseason outlook and the guys they have. They're gonna have to make some decisions. They got a lot of wings who they need to figure out if they're keeping these guys or they're moving on from them. They have a lot of guards that they need to decide, hey, is this guy a part of our future or is he not? So to me, that's going to be kind of the big question with them in regards to making a move like that. Is if the Suns are going to make a move like that, they're going to want to consolidate pieces in order to make that make sense, because they want to have depth. Because we saw in the playoffs they struggled so much with depth. So I don't hate the idea actually, but that's the only concern. The Spurs, in terms of guaranteed contracts, only Keldon Johnson, Doug McDermott, Devontae Graham, Birch, Devin Vassell, Sohan, Malachi Branham, Charles Bassey, and Blake Wesley are their only guaranteed contracts. They have a bunch of restricted free agents. You got Trey Jones up there, so that's going to be a big decision you have to make. It's either point guard for the future. Do you let him walk for nothing? That seems to be unlikely. Romeo Langford and Sandro Mamukelashvili, Kalashvili, who played actually pretty well for them when he came on late in the season. And then you got Zach Collins, who has a non-guaranteed contract as well. So they're going to have to make a decision on the Joneses, the Langfords, those guys, to figure out, I think, what kind of move you're making after that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, in terms of Victor's year one, I mean, I think he's a legitimate defensive player of the year candidate. Depends on how much he plays. I think the Spurs have a real shot at making the playoffs, especially in this play-in world that we live in now in the NBA, where if you finish 10th, I don't think they're going to be tanking. I think it really comes down to, are they going to load manage Victor in a way where they're going to try and preserve his health and say, we're going to come in. Some of that scares me a little bit, because it reminds me of what the Pelicans kind of did with Zion, which was come in already scared that he's going to get hurt. And so you don't play a guy the way he's actually supposed to be played on a night-to-night basis. And the guys don't, doesn't get comfortable playing the way a guy is supposed to be played on a night-to-night basis, I'm no sports scientist, but I just feel that worries me a tad if you're going to operate that way. But if he plays 70-plus games and he's able to stay healthy, I think that we're talking about a guy that defensive player of the year candidate. I agree. I think he has a really good chance of making the All-Star game.
Because also I look at the front court in the Western Conference. I thought this year, honestly, the pickings were kind of slim in that back end. Jaren Jackson had a good year, but do I think that Victor Wembanyama can put up better numbers than Jaren Jackson? I think that's possible. Yeah. They were talking about Aaron Gordon, who's a guy who just missed out on the cut. Aaron Gordon plays on a great team, and he's a big impact player for the Nuggets. But I think Victor Wembanyama could put up bigger numbers than Aaron Gordon last year. Yeah. Next year, absolutely. Yeah. I think in some ways, he has a chance because of some of the guys he's up against. And then, I know the fan vote is limited, but at the end of the day, fans vote too. And if Victor becomes this basketball unicorn that kind of takes over basketball Twitter and basketball conversation on the internet, which I think is very possible given kind of his unique play. Yeah, I think that there's a great chance that maybe he swoops in there. So yeah, I think that is interesting. I want to think about the Victor impact, kind of in the next few years, because I thought, shout out to CBS Sports Radio's Carl Dukes, radio host in Atlanta as well. He made an interesting comment, because we've had this conversation about Victor Wembanyama and LeBron James, and Victor Wembanyama being definitely the best prospect since LeBron James, and some going further enough to say that he's maybe even a better prospect than LeBron was coming out of high school. Remember, LeBron in 4 years had Cleveland in the championship. I think Carl made a very good point talking about that. If you believe Victor is that dude, then that's what he's up against in terms of the kind of impact he has to have. So I'll just pose that question. Do you think it's possible that Victor could have the Spurs as a title contender within 4 years?
I think the impact that we're going to see from Victor is going to be pretty special. I think that, again, I think his impact. I think we saw it even, and I don't want to go too inside baseball, but I just think that we saw it a little bit, obviously, in France. I mean, he left Tony Parker's club, Asvel, and signed with a moribund, basically just run of the mill, nobody on the team, no vets. It was basically like a G League team in Metropolitans '92 that was built around him and some other French prospects, and they were a 2 seed in the French playoffs. And we'll see if they end up winning the title over there in France. But he took basically the worst team in France and turned them into a juggernaut. The day he gets there, that kind of impact. And wins MVP. Obviously, I'm not saying he's going to come in and win MVP next year, but I think that there's a real shot that with what he does defensively, he just changes the game in a way that I don't think we're going to be used to. And then couple that with like Rudy Gobert, for example, incredible defensive impact, but he takes away from what he could do offensively in a lot of ways. You can do things to kind of take Rudy Gobert out of the game as much as you can. There's not going to be anything you can do against this guy. He can guard guys on the perimeter. He can play on the perimeter offensively. He can shoot. Like you said, obviously he's an elite scorer. So I feel like we're talking about a guy that, and I think that's going to have to be a decision that the Spurs make, is how fast do they make a push. I think Greg Popovich's age will be a factor, where I think they'll say, I think he's good enough to help us compete from day one, and I also think that being competitive early on is actually a good thing for a young player's development.
Yeah, I'd expect the Spurs to take that approach, given Pop's age and stuff too.
Yeah, I think it's valuable to instead of being the Minnesota Timberwolves with Andrew Wiggins and Karl-Anthony Towns saying we're going to lose 60 games and Cat's going to develop all these losing habits and this and that, and then you look up 5 years from now and you're like, why is he a losing player? It's because that's what he's been his whole career. He's a winner in college. True. And then he's been a loser ever since.
Yeah,
I think that there's value in having young players you see a Jason Tatum type who came into the league and was a winner from day one. Donovan Mitchell came into the league and was a winner from day one playing on playoff teams. I think that there's value. So I think the Spurs will be winning early and often, and I think that, I think we're talking about a player that 2, 3, 4 years down the line, I think we're talking about a top 10 player in the league. My question to you is, by the end of year one, do you think he's a top 15, top 10 type of player in the league? Top 10 seems gaudy.
Top 10 is gaudy.
But top 20...
20 feel... 2025 I think is I'm saying he's an all-star, then 2025 seems very much in play. Yeah. 10, we see guys like Jimmy Butler, who, some people would not have ranked in their top 10 coming into the playoffs, dominate the playoffs. So, we say he's top 10, I'm like, you're saying he's better than a lot of great players who can, impact not just, winning regular season games, but, winning major playoff games. So, I don't know if I'd go that far, but I think if you're talking about, again, something a little lower than that, if you're talking about 20, I could definitely see that. And then real quickly on the whole conversation about how quickly the Spurs can become a championship contender, I think the one thing to his advantage as to why maybe he can do it is similar to LeBron. I think he's entering a conference that is in major flux. People forget LeBron entered in almost a perfect time in the Eastern Conference. You had the Indiana Pacers at that time implode with Jermaine O'Neal and Ron Artest and Steven Jackson, so they imploded. You had the Nets had seen their window come and go. So they Jason Kidd was starting to get a little older. They kind of saw that window of them making those 2 finals runs didn't pan out. The Celtics were on the decline as well. They were about to hit a reset button very soon. So a lot of those teams that when LeBron entered the league that were the best teams in the NBA, or the best teams in the East at least, Allen Iverson also, the Sixers, on the decline. A lot of those teams that were kind of the teams you talked about as title contenders in the East, they were all in the downswing. The Pistons were the only team that was kind of on the upswing and everyone else was kind of falling apart. So LeBron kind of came in and he kind of just took over. It was a hostile takeover. All those other teams were kind of had their head spinning. All of a sudden, LeBron's in the East Conference Finals. Now he's in the NBA Finals, and it was like, wow, I guess there is a new king in the Eastern Conference. I think the West is kind of in a similar state. Like the Warriors are look like they're about to crumble. The Lakers have their best player being a guy entering year 21. The teams that are on the rise now, maybe there are a little more teams on the rise as opposed to when LeBron came in. Like you do have the Kings, you do have maybe the Grizzlies, though we gotta see what happens to John Morant. But there is a level of flux. Dallas Mavericks, like what's going on with them? Like I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if they're on the rise, on the decline. Like we don't really know what to make of them. So I think there's a chance that for Victor and with the San Antonio Spurs making shrewd moves in the off seasons coming up, that maybe they can kind of figure their way out. They can get a point guard. That maybe they are a team that can make a run and go to the NBA Finals. I don't think that is crazy because of where the West is right now. The Lakers, the Warriors, and the Suns, maybe even with an older Kevin Durant. Like some of these teams are really about to maybe kind of hit the skids, and then at that point, anything's possible when you get rid of the big dog. So I think it's gonna be something important to follow.
This is gonna be controversial, especially for Spurs fans, and this is like total Fantasyland 2K GMing. Because it's not going to happen based off of, just politics and beef and whatnot. But one guy that would, honestly, if I was the Spurs, I would look at as a good potential value piece to circle a little bit. If you're talking about trying to win now and get a guy on the cheap, I'd call the Clippers and say, what can I get for Kawhi?
No, that's never going to happen. Sorry.
Yeah, I know it's never going to happen, but
it's never going to happen. But I do think that they should be aggressive. Like I think that it would be foolish to say, because I think they might go into like a weird no man's land where like they're not going to be like, maybe like if I think like playoffs is gaudy because of just how bad they are right now. I do think that like they go from losing 60 games last year to maybe winning 35. So now you're not in that position to get another top-end guy in the draft potentially. So I think you'd be smarter to say, hey, let's try to get some good players in here. You're going to have about $43 million in cap space this year. They'll have some wiggle room to maybe make some moves.
They're in 10 times a better position than the Dallas Mavericks were when they got Luka.
Yeah, definitely.
The Mavs...
Dallas had all those old guys. Like they had a bunch of...
Luka was like the only thing going for them where like... in terms of assets, where like the Spurs have a ton of assets from the Murray trade, from being bad all these years. Like they've accumulated a lot of young players that a lot of teams around the league don't really know much about. So you still have value for the most part, and a lot of guys that overlap. Like again, you mentioned have Blake Wesley and Malachi Branham and Devin Vassell. And Keldon Johnson.
You're gonna have to consolidate some of those guys. You got to consolidate some of those guys.
Yeah, like you can turn two of those guys into a point guard, two of those guys into another big. Like they don't, you don't need all these guys to do the same thing. So, yeah, no, I think the Spurs are actually in a very interesting spot. I think it's funny, like there's been like I guess the quote unquote anti-Victor crowd, if they're even out there, they're pointing to.
Oh, it's happening. I'm seeing it, and I'm like, these people are gonna look crazy in a couple of months.
They're pointing to the FIBA U19 final against Team USA and saying, "Oh, Kenny Lofton, look at Kenny Lofton, destroying Victor Wembanyama." Which obviously anybody that watched that game, you watched that game, EJ.
Yes.
He was not destroying him. I thought he played well. But,
yes.
Like that just shows you like people didn't know what they were watching at the time because like.
They're showing those highlights, but they're also not showing him completely erasing Chet Holmgren.
Yeah,
the number 2 pick in the draft from last year, like that guy who's dominated college basketball for a season. Yeah.
So like
those highlights are conveniently missing in these people who are these Victor truthers.
Like they don't know what they were watching because you saw like they didn't know what they were watching at the time because Kenny Lofton then went back to Louisiana Tech, played great. And didn't get drafted, and we all were like, "How's Kenny Lofton not?"
Yeah, I was. Yeah, you were like, "What the f's going on?"
Against Victor Wembanyama.
Yeah, exactly.
But at the time, people didn't know how good Victor really was. They didn't know how good Kenny Lofton was. Like what Kenny Lofton was doing should have, raised eyebrows to like this guy is definitely an NBA player. I don't know if he's a superstar, but what he's doing to Victor in this game should establish that he's an NBA player.
I know, exactly. So, either way, it's going to be exciting to watch. I think this is going to be one of the more exciting players to enter the NBA. So, NBA draft people, we've been talking about Victor for a long time. We're going to be excited to see what happens in his journey in the NBA. It's going to start in San Antonio. I think San Antonio fans, you have a lot to be excited about. I think that your fortune's about to change very, very soon. But that's going to do it for now. For this video, again, EJ Stewart, Kendall Stewart, we're back. New Generation Media, giving you guys draft coverage. Once again, we'll have plenty of videos dropping throughout this draft season. So make sure you guys keep it subscribed here, New Generation Media. For Kendall, I'm EJ. Take it easy, guys. Peace.